The room went quiet the moment Walter Yetnikoff threw the papers across the table. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind that happens when everyone in the room understands that the most powerful man in the building has just made up his mind, and nothing left to say is going to change it. It was 1983. CBS Records was sitting on the best-selling album in history. Thriller had already moved tens of millions of copies. It had broken chart records that people genuinely believed would never fall. And by the cold logic of the music business, the story was over. The album had peaked. The label had taken its money. Time to move on to the next thing. That was Yetnikoff's logic anyway. He ran on numbers and timelines and the unsentimental certainty that everything in the music business had a shelf life. And his numbers said this: an album that had already run its course did not need $1 million music video. Nothing did. At the time, the most expensive videos in the industry cost maybe $50,000. They were promotional tools, cheap ones. You made them fast, you handed them to MTV, and you forgot about them. So when the budget estimate for Michael's idea landed on his desk, $900,000, Yetnikoff didn't negotiate. He didn't ask questions. He picked up the papers, looked at the number, and said what he said. I am not spending $1 million on a dead album. Not 1 cent. He put the papers back down and walked out. The project was canceled, finished, dead before a single frame had been shot. What Yetnikoff didn't understand, what almost no one in that room understood, was that Michael Jackson had not come to CBS Records to ask for permission. He had come to give them the first look at something that was going to happen whether they were part of it or not. The meeting wasn't a negotiation, it was a formality. The idea had started, the way Michael's best ideas always started, with a feeling he couldn't shake. He had been in London some months before, sitting alone in a cinema, watching An American Werewolf in London. John Landis had directed it. The transformation scenes, the way a human body could be shown twisting and tearing itself into something monstrous, had done something to him that he couldn't fully explain even to himself. He sat in the dark staring at the screen and something locked into place. Not a thought. A certainty. He called Landis not long after. The details of exactly when have blurred slightly over the years. But the call happened, and what Michael said in it is something Landis repeated in interviews for decades afterward. I want to become a monster. Not in a music video. Not in the short, cheap, forgettable way the industry manufactured them. He wanted a short film. 14 minutes. A story, real actors, practical horror effects, genuine terror followed by genuine emotion. He wanted to direct an audience the way a film director does, to take 60 million people somewhere they weren't expecting to go and make them feel something they couldn't quite name when it was over. Landis understood it immediately. He had worked with enough people in entertainment to recognize the difference between someone who had an idea and someone who had a vision. Michael had a vision. It was specific and fully formed and completely unreasonable given the context of what a music video was supposed to be in 1983. And when the budget came back at $900,000, it was unreasonable in another way entirely. CBS said no. Yetnikoff walked out, and Michael sat down with his manager, Frank DeLeo, and director John Landis, and they worked out what to do next. If the label wouldn't fund the video, they would sell the making of the video. Not the finished product, the process. The cameras rolling while Rick Baker built zombies out of latex. The fog machines running all night in an empty Los Angeles street. Michael sitting in a makeup chair for hours while his own face disappeared under someone else's hands. They would document the entire thing and sell access to it before a single dance move had been rehearsed. Frank DeLeo made the calls. The pitch was simple. Michael Jackson is making the most expensive music video ever attempted in the history of the music business. And we are offering you the first chance to show the world how he does it. MTV heard it. They didn't broadcast documentaries. They said yes anyway and paid $250,000. Showtime heard it. They said yes and wrote a check for $300,000. Vestron Video came in for the VHS distribution rights. Before a single light had been set up on a single set, before Rick Baker had mixed his first batch of prosthetic material, before Michael had sat down in a makeup chair for the first time, the project had funded itself. CBS Records hadn't given them a single dollar. Michael had gone around the system entirely, built a financial structure that the system didn't even have a category for, and arrived at production day with the money already in place. That's not stubbornness. That's not luck. That's a level of thinking that most executives spend entire careers trying to develop, deployed by a 25-year-old who just wanted to turn into a werewolf. The shoot began in the fall of 1983, and it was clear from the first day that nothing about it was going to be easy. Rick Baker ran the makeup department. Baker was the best practical effects artist in Hollywood. He had just won an Academy Award for An American Werewolf in London, the exact film that had given Michael the idea in the first place. The work Baker's team had to do here was extraordinary. They needed zombies that could move, that could dance, that could hold up to prolonged close-up scrutiny. And they needed to take the most recognizable face on the planet and make it into something unrecognizable. Every morning, Michael sat in the makeup chair, and the process started. Prosthetic pieces were applied in careful layers. The contact lenses, those enormous yellow cat eyes that would become one of the most iconic images in music history, went in last. When they were in, Michael could barely see. The world turned into a soft blur of light and color and indistinct shapes. He sat there unable to move comfortably, unable to see properly, surrounded by the chemical smell of adhesive and latex and the quiet, focused work of Baker's team. And then he walked onto the set. The people who were there during that shoot all come back to the same thing when they describe it. They talk about the moment Michael stepped in front of the cameras, fully made up and in character, and how something about him shifted. Not the monster specifically, something harder to name, the particular quality of self-consciousness he carried in normal conversation, that famous shyness, the way he seemed to occupy less space than he needed to, simply stopped. He moved differently. He took up the space differently. The set was in a part of Los Angeles that felt right for what they were making. The streets at night had the right kind of darkness, the right texture. Fog machines ran for hours at a stretch, filling the air between buildings with that low drifting mist that caught the light in exactly the way Landis needed. Word spread through Hollywood almost immediately. A $900,000 Michael Jackson project, directed by the man who made American Werewolf, shooting nights in Los Angeles. The industry gossip machine picked it up fast. People started appearing at the set who had no official reason to be there. Marlon Brando came. Fred Astaire came. They stood at the edge of the set in the dark, watching from a distance, because they wanted to see what this particular person was doing with this particular idea. Think about that for a second. Marlon Brando and Fred Astaire, standing in the shadows at 2 in the morning, waiting to watch a pop singer dance with zombies. People at that level know what they're looking at. The choreography took days to get right. What Michael and choreographer Michael Peters designed together, that loose, rolling, shoulder-first movement, the way the whole thing shifts between genuinely unsettling and somehow joyful, was not simple to execute at scale. 50 dancers in full makeup, moving in precise formation, sustaining the energy through take after take. Michael was working in the most restrictive costume of anyone on set and never complained once. Nobody who was there can remember a single moment where he lost patience with the process. When Landis finally called action on the main sequence, the moment the camera finds Michael's face and he turns and starts to move, it came together the way great things come together. Not all at once, not perfectly on the first take, but in a way that everyone on set could feel happening. Something was being made that hadn't existed before. The video aired on MTV on December 2nd, 1983. The network had been building toward it for weeks. Promotional spots, countdowns, the kind of anticipation building film studios did for major releases, applied for the first time to a music video. By the time the broadcast happened, the audience was already waiting. And then it ran. What nobody had fully calculated was the scale of what came next. People watched it and wanted to watch it again. Immediately, the phones at MTV started ringing before the video had even finished. The network began airing it twice a day, something that had never been done for a music video. And it wasn't enough. The demand didn't drop. It grew. Walter Yetnikoff heard the numbers from his office at CBS Records. The album he had called dead, the project he had refused to fund, had just triggered a surge the industry didn't have a precedent for. An album on the market for over a year was suddenly selling at a rate that new releases didn't reach. 14 million additional copies moved in the weeks and months after Thriller aired. Stores ran out. Distribution couldn't keep up. The record that was supposed to be finished had become the best-selling album in the history of recorded music, and it was never going to give that title back. Yetnikoff was not a man who admitted being wrong, but in interviews years later, when Thriller came up, something in his manner shifted. He had been in the business long enough to know the difference between losing and being outplayed. Losing happens to everyone. Being outplayed means someone saw something you couldn't see and moved before you even understood the board. You couldn't stop it, he said once. What Michael had done was bigger than making a great short film. He had changed what a music video was allowed to be. Before Thriller, they were promotional material, short, cheap, forgettable by design. They existed to remind people a song was out. After Thriller, they were something else entirely. They had directors and stories and budgets and ambition. The entire industry recalibrated in the months that followed. Not gradually, immediately. Because once everyone saw what was possible, the old version of possible stopped being acceptable. Michael had understood that before anyone else in the room. He had understood it clearly enough to fund it himself when the system closed its doors, to build it at a level that left no room for argument once it was finished. The system told him the album was dead. He went around the system, made something the industry had never seen, and let it run. Yetnikoff was in his office alone when the final numbers came in. He didn't make any calls. He just sat there with the paper in front of him and the number on it that didn't make sense for an album that was supposed to be over. Some lessons don't need anyone to deliver them. They just sit there on the desk and wait for you to understand them on your own. Now here's the question that's been sitting at the back of this whole story. When the most powerful people in the room tell you it's finished, that the thing you believe in is dead, that the math doesn't work, that the timing is wrong, do you accept their version of reality? Or do you find a different door? Michael Jackson found a different door. Every single time. Drop that in the comments.